All right, looks like it's about that time, so I'm going to go ahead and get things started. First of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this month's Laserfiche Build Along. Today we're going to be looking at forms for beginners. My name is Stephen Krutzfeldt. I'm a pre-sales engineer here with CDI, and I'll be taking you through this today. So first of all, to start off, what is a build along? In short, a build-along is an interactive experience designed to guide the viewer through creation and deployment of a common business process. So for example, today, we're going to be looking specifically at forms, how to build a form, how to build out a forms process, and what that can look like beginning to end. If at any time you have any questions or need help, feel free to post questions into the chat box on that little floating GoToWebinar window. I will take some time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions that may be posted. To get the most out of today's webinar, first off, make sure you take good notes. Notes can also include screenshots. I'm a big fan personally of taking a lot of screenshots. Don't be afraid to ask any questions that come up. Please do complete the survey afterwards. We do take your feedback seriously, and anything that we can do to make these more informative or more helpful, we absolutely want to hear your feedback. And know that this will be recorded and posted to our CDI YouTube channel. So you can always go back and rewatch it, pause, speed it up, what have you. So today's process, forms for beginners. The intended audience for this webinar is any users who are relatively new to forms, Laserfiche participant users, people who may be included in a forms process where they might be either filling out a form or approving those different forms, and then also Laserfiche Forms administrators. If you're following along with us, you will need access to Laserfiche Forms, the Laserfiche client, thick or web, as well as the admin console. To help you follow along, we're going to begin by looking at an example of a forms process. I'm kind of going to go in a little bit different order than what we usually do with some of these build alongs by showing you the finished product first and then reverse engineering it and showing you how we got to that point. I think it does a better job of painting the picture of how forms can actually be utilized, and then that way you understand what you're building. We're then going to create the form and then create the forms process. So with that, let's go ahead and get into it. So right now I am logged into Laserfiche Forms right now as an administrator. So you'll see here, if I go up in the corner, I'll be able to see the administration information, account, and all of that. If you were logged in as an admin, you should see all the same tabs that I am seeing. This will come in handy. Well, it'll actually be imperative later. If we're actually going to create a form, you'll need to be able to have those security rights. So let's go ahead and take a look at a process first before we start building. So I'm going to start the process by going to my Start Process option. I can also do it by navigating to either the Design or the Manage, selecting the forms process that I'm interested in, and then hitting Start from there. But I'm going to go ahead and do it this way. And we're just going to hit Start. And I'm going to look at an expense reimbursement for our example today. So Laserfiche Forms can be used for a lot of things, especially here at CDI. We use them for pretty much everything, from expense reports to time off requests, new hire onboarding. It can be used for pretty much anything that you would normally fill out a paper form for. So here we have an example of what an employee reimbursement form could look like. It's going to ask for some basic information like employee name, their department, manager, position. As you can see, I have this linked up to an external table, so everything will be automatically filled in when I select the name. So know that that is also a possibility. There is the ability for us to link to external tables, so these can be more or less filled out on their own. Expense type, is it an office expense or is it a travel expense? Notice when I select travel, it's going to ask me for start and end dates. And so you can make these fields dynamic as well. We'll say that I traveled from the 9th to the 10th, and my travel purpose was meetings, spelled incorrectly. So then you can start adding things like what date your expense was incurred on, give it a purpose. We'll say it was lodging, we stayed in Marriott, and it was $200. You can also add attachments. We can upload things like receipts. And we'll go ahead and add another one here too, so you'll see we can have multiple expenses as well. Say that this one's for a meal, and we'll call this Big Ed's Barbecue. It was $20. We can also have things like formulas that are going to calculate the sum of all of these different fields, so we can see the total reimbursement requested. Now, every forms process is made up of two different pieces, and only two: the form itself, and then the process of where it goes to, if there needs to be a approval process or an approval step, if it needs to go to somebody for a signature, and then if it's being saved to Laserfiche or emailed or what have you. So this first step is just creating a form that's going to be filled out, and then the ability for it to be submitted. And this is what we'll be building when I say we're going to create a form. Now the process, the way that we have this set up is it needs to go through the approval of a manager. Now the manager can access this from the forms inbox. We should see an open task that needs approval for an expense reimbursement. So manager will be able to go in here, see the expense form that has been submitted. They will be able to see any and all attachments that were added if we had added one. We can also see who submitted it and some of the other information over here on the right-hand side. And then if we think it looks good, there's the ability to add a signature here. So the manager can sign it and approve the request. Once that's approved, it can go to any number of places, be routed for processing. It can go straight into Laserfiche, be saved as a Laserfiche, into a Laserfiche folder. Oftentimes we'll also run workflows to send out an email, but you can start thinking about how these processes look in your organization. So now that we have a general idea of what a basic forms example looks like, let's go ahead and jump into the process of creating one. Now we have this design tab here, and the design is going to allow you to create your forms process. And it gives you a couple of different options. It's first of all going to show us all the forms we already have created in case we want to add different information to them or tweak them. It's going to show us which ones are published, so which ones are actually being used and which ones are not. When we create a blank process, it will literally just be exactly what it sounds like, that you can create the form, but it's not going to give us any sort of starting options. The most common one that I see used is a forms submission. That whenever I create a new form, I usually go with the form submission, and that's actually what we're going to choose here in a second, but I want to go through these others. But what that means is we're going to create a form, and then once we hit submit, like with our expense reimbursement, when we hit that submit button, that's when it starts to go down the path and where it gets routed to a supervisor. And then if they reject it, it goes back to the person who submitted it, and we start building out that process, which will become more clear shortly. If we know there's an approval process, we can go ahead and add that, and it will automatically add the starting form submission, an approval step, and the end. So it builds out half the process for you already. If you've been with Laserfiche for any amount of time, you'll know that there's a very interested user community. Everyone always sharing their different processes and information about how they've gotten Laserfiche applications to work for them. And those are all, you are able to export those and share those across with different users. And so oftentimes we'll have someone send us a file that we'll just upload that process and then simply make a couple of changes and tailor it to our own organization, put it our own theme to it so it reflects the CDI look and feel. But if someone else has something that you like, feel free to ask them, hey, can I get that forms process? Chances are they'll oblige you. Now, the business process library is a pretty great feature. This has many, I think it's close to 100 pre-built business processes already ready to go and available right out of the box. And these are processes that have been created by different users in that area. So accounting and finance, all of these were created by people who actually work in accounting and finance. These are tried and true business processes, not just something arbitrary that Laserfiche came out with, but real processes that work. They are listed by different category. There are also some that are industry specific. So if you work in government, and you know that you want different licenses or different applications, you could probably find something very close to what you're looking for already pre-built. What's great about these is it gives you the level of complexity. As you can see here, between 1 and 3, 1 being the easiest, 3 being the most complex. It'll give you an example of what the process looks like. So you can even see that, okay, Snap application, an email goes out, and then somebody has to approve it. And then depending on that approval process, it's going to go down one of multiple different branches. So it builds out, does most of the work for you, and then you can tweak it around. It'll also show you what the form looks like. So rather than creating each of these fields on your own, it can already lay out the name, date of birth, social security number, all those different fields that you're going to need, as well as things like checkboxes. So if that looks like something that you want, you can simply download the file and then import the process, and it'll be ready to go. Once imported, you will of course have to add the correct users for things to be routed to, and you may want to add or take out some different fields so it's tailored to your organization. What we want to do today, though, is look at the process of creating a forms process just beginning to end and what that actually looks like. This is where the real build along is going to begin. So I'm going to start with a form submission. I'm going to give it a process name, and I'm just going to call it the CDI webinar form. So we'll wait for that to load up. And what we're going to do is create a form for registering for a webinar. This is going to put us on a list to say that, yes, we would like to sign up for a CDI webinar. It's going to default and bring us to the forms process area, which I'd actually like to visit next. This is where we're going to talk about the different steps, but I want to begin with the actual form itself. So if you're following along at home, you'll see over here there's Process Designer, and then there's Forms. We want to click on our starting form, which will be the actual form itself with the different fields that we're going to be filling out. Now here you'll see that it gives us a canvas, and there are multiple options of different field types along the left-hand side. And the beautiful part about this is everything's drag and drop. First thing I'm going to do, though, however, is edit my title. I'm just going to call it CDI webinar. The next thing we need to do is think about what types of fields that we're going to want. What kind of information is going to be relevant if we want someone to sign up for one of our webinars? Well, first would be name. I think that's pretty basic. So let's go ahead and just take a single line, and we're going to drag it over to the webinar canvas area. And we're going to call it first name. And that's pretty much it. We can just leave it like that. There are some other options here to start customizing this or configuring it even deeper. We can make it required. We can add text above and text below information, so additional information there. We can limit the number of characters, and we can even choose the field width from small to extra large. We're going to go ahead and make that required, and then add another one and call this one last name. Make that required. And as you build this, at any time you can go up and see this little icon, if you will, with an EYE, and check the preview. And you can see what it looks like, and you can even try it out. If you submit it, it won't actually go anywhere, but it will show you kind of the look and feel of as you're building it. So as you can see, very user-friendly. In fact, when I was going through my training and how to use Laserfiche, Forms was my favorite thing to actually get into because it was relatively easy to do, but yet so powerful. So you could create some really cool ideas and really cool forms. So let's look at some of the other options we have here. If we want to have the email address, there's a specific option for email. Again, we can give it a different label. We can give it text below. A lot of times what I see text below would be things like an example of, has to be like at Oops, I'm clicking on other things.com or something like that. And so when we say done, we can see that it gives us the example below. What's great about these is they're also already configured to throw an error if they don't meet the right criteria. So if I type gibberish in there and try and move, it'll say, hey, that's not an email address. There's no @ symbol, there's no dot. So I'd be like, oh, you're absolutely right. There you go. And so that's already pre-built in there. You don't have to customize it. If you are very proficient with HTML, CSS, and some other programming languages, that's great. You can use that to even enhance these further. But a lot of the basic functionality is already right out of the box. So similarly, if you want to attach like a file upload, that can be another option as well. And you can configure it to be required, so they have to include something that's required. A great example of this is if somebody's going to be applying for a job. Maybe you just want some basic information about the job they're applying for and you want them to attach their resume. You can make that a required option here. Simply call it resume attachment. The address field is pretty great as well. That it automatically brings up the street address, address lines, city, state, and it formats them side by side. So once again, you can see if we take a look at the preview, if you bring that in, it's already starting to look like a form. First name, last name, email, address, so on and so forth. Now something else I want to show you that I use oftentimes is how we can actually add some additional CSS if we want to use masks or some formatting. So I'm going to call this one phone number. And actually one more quick thing. Have you noticed that the different labels are to the side? Well, oftentimes I see a lot of forms and the label's on top, and I feel like that looks a little bit nicer. And so what we can do is actually go into the settings and say, you know what, instead of putting the labels on the left, let's go ahead and make them on the top. And the other thing you can do is say, yeah, this is fine, but I'd actually like it to be, maybe landscape instead of portrait. And so we can switch it to landscape. If we do that, we'll see that it immediately takes effect. And so we can start looking at our form and the way it's laid out. It looks a little bit nicer. Maybe move the file upload to the bottom or something. But one of the things that we often do is we'll add things to make it so things like phone number are always consistent, that they're always the same. And the way we do that is by giving it what we call a CSS class. So I'm just going to call it phone, so that way I know that anything with the CSS class phone can then be referred to by my CSS code as such. Or in this case, it's going to be JavaScript actually. But oftentimes we'll just go ahead and keep these already ready to go, so we can just copy and paste them in, save it. And you'll notice that what it's going to do is it's going to format it to have the parentheses on either side, the dashes, etc. And it's going to be looking for phone. So if we go ahead and look at our preview now, we have the phone number, and instead of being a blank number, it formats it automatically. And we can do that for social security numbers. We can do it for just making our fields side by side. There's a lot of different options. And so if that's something you're interested in, let us know. We can certainly help you out with that. Let's go back to our layout again. Anything I'm missing here? So date field will automatically be come in as month, day, year. It's also going to have a date selector, meaning that when you click on it, it'll ask you to select the date. So bring up that little date window. Similarly with currency, it's going to auto format it in such a way that's going to have the dollar amount by it. So if I type in a number, it'll automatically add that comma and the dollar amount. Now, if you want to add some information, you saw me earlier do a total, where it actually calculated the total of multiple currency fields. The first way I did that is I created a collection. A collection means that there's going to be multiple options. I'll just go ahead and leave that as collection so you can see it. And we'll need to drag something into that. So what this is saying is that all the currency boxes are going to be in a collection, so we can add multiple. And then if we go in and edit this, go ahead and see. Sorry, actually, let's go back here. I'm going to give it a variable of currency so I know how to refer to it later. This is what it's going to be called on the surface, but this is basically what the software is going to be referring to it as. So now my total field, if we edit the total field, we can go into the Advanced tab, and here we see calculations. So first of all, we want to go into the formula of sum. We can search for that. And so we'll say equals sum, and then we'll just have to tell it what we want to calculate the sum of. And we can use this greater than sign to insert the different variables. Now the variable of currency, as you just saw me add, is just called currency. And we may need to refresh. So I'm just gonna go ahead and hit F5 and refresh this so I can bring up my information. So let's go ahead and go in here, edit that, go into the advanced section, and the sum is going to be, there we have more of our variables. We go into the collection and we see what's called currency, and say done. So now if we go in and we take a look at this, we should be able to see we add 100 and then we add another one of 150. Total, it's coming up with 250. And so we can just keep going, 550. So that is how you can add formulas, and that's how you can add masking. Now, the one thing that is pretty obvious to me anyway is that it's very white. It's almost abrasive. So let's go ahead and look how we can change that as well. If we go to themes, there are multiple themes already available out of the box, but then there's also the ability to save your own. So we have some custom, orange and white themes that have the city's digital logo on it. The one with the newer CDI logo on it, but you can always create your own and customize your own as well. What's nice about this is that if you just go into customize, you can select your logo by just grabbing a logo from any network folder. You can change the background color by just selecting a color, or you can choose any one of these other options. You can also go to more colors and select just the most hideous thing you've ever seen in your life, like green plaid. Looks great. Form title can always be edited as well. So if you want this to not be gray, but maybe make it black or blue or what have you, you can make that blue, bold it, italicize it. But all of these are very easy to change, even down to the buttons. If you want your submit button to be bolded and you want it to be, I don't know, blue, you can do that as well. So as you can see, creating a color scheme for your form works as well. That's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. You'd probably want to make it a little bit nicer. But once you get to that point where you're like, you know what, this looks really good. It matches the theme of our website. This is kind of what we want to use going forward, and we want all of them to look the same. Then you can add that like we have with our CDI forms. So now the last part of this is going to be like, what happens after you fill out this form? That's where we're going to go into the process designer. Now the first option is going to be simply submitting the form. So if we double click on this, we'll see that the starting form is going to be called starting form because I didn't change the name of it. It's going to be submitted upon submit. you can decide to give your users the option to save it as a draft for later. You can also allow them to save it offline. There's even another option if you have 10.4.1 that says if you leave the form alone for a certain amount of time, then it will automatically save it as a draft. And so you can return to it later. So if you're filling out a form that is very involved, sometimes these are 10, 12 pages long, and you don't get to it, or you go and look for some other information, it won't close down. It'll save that for you. So next thing we want to do, I'm going to go ahead and delete this thing. It's just like it was before. We're using drag and drop. So one thing I'll want to do is have a user task, meaning that a human being needs to interact with this form after submission. So we just drag it up here, right next to it. We connect a arrow to show that this is going to be the next task, and then we double click on it to give it some information. This is where you're going to say who it's going to be assigned to. It can be assigned to a team. It can be assigned to a team based on a variable. What that means is depending on certain information. So for example, let's say that the total is greater than 100. Then it goes to a certain team. If it's less than 100, it goes to a different team. That's how you can use some of those filters. And you can bring in all of those different tokens based on what was filled out in the form. Oftentimes, though, the first step is going to go to a specific user. In this case, I'm just going to grab my forms user so it works. But as you could see, when I start filling that out, it'll bring up the different users. If we want to include an email, we can do that. If we want to include priority, make it high, medium, or low, we can do that as well. But let me go ahead and say that yes, when this is submitted, it's going to go to forms and admin, both to be either approved or denied. And the way I say that is I go to the form option, select the starting form, show that they are going to either approve or reject it. Now these can say whatever you want. We can say it's going to be called approve form or reject form. And we can also give it some other options saying things like the different pathways, exclusive gateways, inclusive, and parallel. The difference between these, exclusive means that it can only go down one path, one or the other. It can't go down multiple. The inclusive means it can go down multiple, and the parallel means that it will go down both or all at the same time. What we're going to do, though, is look at an exclusive gateway to see how we can use that. So after it's been submitted, it's going to go to this gateway. Or sorry, after it's been either approved or denied, it's going to go down this gateway. And that's the only place it can go. However, once it goes here, we can have it branch off. And maybe we will have this service task. By the way, when I say service task, what I'm really referring to is most likely the save to Laserfiche repository task. So service task equals save to LF. You'll just need to select your profile, so the basic information about like which Laserfiche server you're using. And it should give you the option of a drop-down. And the repository is in that server. And then you can just add your username and passwords for that. You will have to make sure that the user you're using, if you're using forms or admin, or if you're using one of your own personal users, they will have to have access to save the documents and save information and add metadata to Laserfiche. Otherwise, it won't have the ability to do so. So you'll have to make sure there's some security setup done as well. The other thing you're going to look at is we're saving from a certain step. It's going to ask us where we want to save it to. You can give it a certain name. By default, it's going to have the form name and the time. You can also give it a path by going in here and saying, yeah, we want it to come into incoming scans. And you can save the form itself as a PDF or a TIFF. You can also include an action history. What's nice about that is then if you go into Laserfiche and open up the form itself, it'll show you all the steps of who approved it, who submitted it, and what it looked like at each step. And you can also configure metadata fields. So if you go to the configure fields option, you can go ahead and select a template. I don't really have one necessarily for this, but what we do is just human resources. So you can see an example of employee last name. We would select the token of field variables, last name, first name would line up, of course, with first name, and so on and so forth. And so that way, when this is saved to Laserfiche, it'll have that metadata template assigned to it as well. Now, the way we configure this, let's say that it is approved, so it's going to be saved to Laserfiche the way that we just said. We'll need to click on that branch and tell it that you branch are going to be the approved branch. And your conditional is going to mean that the last action, or rather the last user action, which would be this action, equals approved form. And we'll insert that. And we can just save. And then if we want to do another branch, let's say maybe we want it to be routed back to the initiator. So let's do this. We'll go back to send to the initiator. This will say that it's going to go back to a user, and we don't necessarily know who the initiator is, but luckily there's an option for initiator. We'll go ahead and save that. And I'm just getting all sorts of pop-ups, so I apologize for that. So we'll go ahead and click on the branch itself, and we will give it a name of reject. And the conditional is going to be last user action equals the other one. Oops, last user action equals reject form, and insert and save. Yes, I understand. And so we can say that once it has been rejected, it goes back to whoever initially submitted the form, and they will need to make changes. And then when they submit it, it can then go down a exclusive branch. And this time I'm not going to give it any options. So if there are no rules on the branches, it will just go down the only branch it can. And so basically this one will loop back in for the approval step. So they submit the form we created. It goes in for approval. If it's approved, it gets saved to Laserfiche, and then we can just end the process. If it's rejected, it'll go down here, back to the initiator, who will then have to make changes, resubmit it for approval. It can go round and round, or it can go and save to Laserfiche. And I'm not sure why it's doing that. So for example, if we wanted to go ahead and save this, which it's not going to save, and run it, it looks like it's not going to run either. But ultimately, it'll look a lot like what we saw earlier. Other options, when you're ready to publish it, you'll go up here into the left-hand corner. We'll see this is unpublished. We would simply go up and select published, and that will make it available for your users to then fill out and run the process. The other thing you want to pay attention to is there is a link to the form, so this can be shared so your users know how to access the form, that this is all web-based. And similarly, if you set up access rights, you can make these public. a lot of our users today are using forms, and they have those saved on their city websites. So these are public-facing forms that anyone can fill out. There's no need for every single person to have a license if it's a public form. Simply made public, and then it can be routed and handled accordingly. Now, obviously, there is a lot of information around forms. That's just kind of the basic. How do we create a simple form and create a simple forms process of either approve or deny? If you want to learn more, absolutely reach out to our team. We'd be more than happy to go through this with you. If you have any ideas of forms that you'd like to see or processes that would work really well in forms, but you're just not sure how to get started, that's exactly what our consultants are here for, is to help tell you about how other companies or organizations have used this and what could possibly work for you as well. So with that, there's a lot of different resources out there. Laserfiche Answers being probably the best one. That takes us back to that user community. If you post a question out there, it'll be out there for anyone who's worked with Laserfiche to answer. They usually get back to you pretty quickly, and chances are if you're having an issue, somebody else has had this issue before. The Solution Exchange is another one where the user community can exchange ideas and even forums, things like that. There's also just a lot of documentation that Cities Digital puts out as well at citiesdigital.peakportals.com. Take a chance to fill out the survey, please. That'll automatically enter you to win an awesome CDI coffee mug, and it'll give me the chance to review what you found helpful and what you would have liked to see and how we could do this better. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and open things up for questions. So if you have any questions, please post them to the chat window. I'll be looking at the chat and the questions windows both. It looks like there's one of each. Feel free to use either one. And also remember that this will be recorded, so you will have the ability to go back through and watch it again, pause, rewind, fast forward. And there's also going to be a, oh, here we go. Can I please get the phone CSS? Absolutely, happy to share that. We'll see if this actually works. Looks like I'm not able to post that. Yeah, it looks like I'm not able to paste it into the chat necessarily, but what I can do is go ahead and send that out. I'm just gonna go ahead and make a note with our team to make sure that everyone who's on the call today gets a chance to, has that email out to them. So if your email was on here, then I will go ahead and send that out. Yes, absolutely. No, that's been incredibly helpful because I'm not a programmer by any stretch of the imagination. So I rely on others, what the user community has put out and used. And I'm a big fan of copying and pasting what works. And it's worked out really well for me. And the recording for this webinar is going to be at the Cities Digital YouTube channel. And Eric says that he's going to go ahead and post it in here as well, so you'll have that. You're welcome. There's a lot of great content on there, and we're always putting out more. And in fact, there's another webinar on Tuesday that's also going to be covering some of the fundamentals and basics of Laserfiche Forms. It won't be so much of a build along as it will be a kind of a guided tour through some of the different features and functions. Whereas this is more so designed to show you how you can drag and drop to build the form, how you can create the process. Next week's tutorial will just be walking through some of the features and functions. We also have added a couple of examples of forms processes specifically for municipalities, things like business license applications, fire inspections, building permits inspections. So you can see what those business processes, and I pulled those right out of the business process library that I showed at the beginning, where I just downloaded it, tailored it, and then made a recording of what's already out there and available. So that'll be another good resource for you if you're interested in what it could look like and what that process could include. If nothing else, it's just a really good way to kind of get those creative juices flowing. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. I hope you found this helpful. I certainly had a good time doing it. Thanks again, and we hope to talk to all of you soon.